All right, welcome everyone. It is after 6 p.m. according to my clock. I'm Commissioner Dave Strohmeyer. I'm joined by Commissioners Josh Slotnick and Juanita Vero, and our CAO, Chris Lonsberry, and both Josh and Chris will be presenting an update on this year's budget and also property taxes in Missoula County. Thank you all who are out there in the ether joining us virtually. We have a small group here, intimate group, in the Sophie Moise room of the Missoula County Courthouse. So without further ado, I will turn it over to my colleague Josh Slotnick to kick things off.
Thanks a lot, Dave. And thanks, Griffin, and thanks, Jane, for coming. It may be puzzling. Why do we want to lead off a discussion of the budget with a discussion of property taxes? And I want to do this because there is an assumption that our budget has a tremendous impact on your property tax liability. And certainly there is an impact, but I believe out in the popular world, and I'm basing this on my experience going to talk to many, many groups about property taxes, that the importance people generally put, or the effect people generally put on our budget in terms of their ultimate property tax liability is overblown. So what I want to do for a few minutes is explain the mechanics of the property tax system, and both of you guys interrupt me at any time and ask questions. It'll be way better that way than if I just drone on and on. So first I want to say that we are on what's called a 2-year reappraisal cycle. So that means the state, not the county, but the state, every 2 years, reappraises every piece of property in the county. And I'm really stressing the word property, not house. Often when we think about property taxes, we leap right to the property taxes we pay, which makes tons of sense, and everybody would do that, and I do that too. I think about my kids and their houses. But it's not called house tax, it's called property tax. So every 2 years, the state reappraises. That means they come up with a new value for every piece of property in the entire county. And I'm really stressing property because in the eyes of the state, I'm talking about the Department of Revenue, there are 16 different types of property, 16 different classes, and each one of those classes is treated differently. We're all pretty familiar with residential property, but that is only but one piece, one slice, one of the 16 different classifications. So every 2 years we go through this process. This year is not a reappraisal year. So that means we're working off of the same values that the state came up with last year. So I want to explain those values. Actually, there's a name for this. It's called the taxable value. And often when you hear that word taxable value, people are immediately assuming the assessed value, the value that the state says your property is worth, or people think, oh, you're talking about how much taxes they paid. But no, it's this taxable value is entirely its own animal. And taxable value has a far bigger effect on how much you're going to pay in taxes than the budget does. And this is really important. The taxable value is incredibly volatile. It can go up in mad swings, whereas our budget, the piece of our budget that we generate from taxes is capped, statutorily capped. It cannot be volatile going up. It's quite literally capped. Whereas taxable values, I'm going to get to in a second, can do mad swings. And those mad swings have an incredibly powerful effect, a massive impact on any one person's tax liability, especially if their property is a house. Okay, so we're going to back up here and look at this incredible chart. Isn't it nice? Okay. It's beautiful. Thank you. So first, we're looking at the assessed value. So I said every 2 years, the state goes through this process, and they come up with a value for every type of property and every individual property. I come up with an assessed value for every individual property in the state. But it's super important to note here that those 16 different classifications are valued differently. This is a really big deal. So of the 16 different classifications, a whole bunch of them make sense, and a person would just guess this. You could have a farm. You could own a forest. You could own a house. You could own an industrial factory. You could own a railroad or a telecom or a church. Every one of things is treated differently by the state. Now, we're all pretty used to residential property. The valuation method for residential property is 100% of market rate. So they say Griffin's house is worth $600,000. I'm just making this up. So, okay. So Griffin's buddy's house is worth $600,000, right? And she might say, yeah, I could probably sell this for even more. What the state does, all in one day, at one moment, with a piece of software, is determine to the best of their ability the market value, 100% of market rate for that house at that time. So it's not always 100% accurate, but the state doesn't have enough employees, and our state's too big to, can you imagine sending actual people off to every single property? And we're talking about residential property now. It can't be done. Often the state makes a mistake. Typically, the mistakes they make are they say that Dave's got a third story when he only has a second story. Or this actually happened to me once. My family owned a farm for decades, and one year they said, oh, that land's development land, it's not a farm. So we called them, they sent inspectors out, they stood at the gate, they saw trucks and tractors and people coming and going, and they said, oh yeah, it's a farm, and reduced the value. Okay, so first step in this process is the state determines the value of your property, and that determination of value depends tremendously on what class your property is in. The way, because when I mentioned my example of my farmland, it was over $4,000 in taxes. And then when it was reassessed as a farm, because it was an active farm with employees and vehicles and trucks and trailers and everything happening, the taxes were just over $400. So on our little chunk of 10 acres, it was a 10x reduction in value. So it's a really big deal that which class your property is in means so much. It's a very big thing. So the next piece, that first part was the value of your property based on what class it's in. The second piece is the tax rate at which your property is taxed. And each one of these classes has a different tax rate. Okay, pop quiz for you, I know, because you follow this stuff. You follow this stuff too. What's the tax rate for residential property? 1.3. Nice job, Griffin. Good job. 1.35. But we'll call it. You get it. You get the star. No holding back. 1.35. So in the fall, before the legislative session, the Department of Revenue presents to the legislature, to a committee, because an interim committee, because the legislature doesn't start up until January of the new year, these odd-numbered years. They present to the legislature a tax rate that would keep residential property taxes flat. Now, not the other 15 categories, just residential property. What would the rate be? Is that 1.35%? That's not carved in stone. It's not like the constellations or the sun and the moon or Mount Sentinel. We can't possibly adjust them. In fact, it's quite adjustable. And over the last 40 years, on multiple occasions, our state legislature, in a bipartisan way, has chosen to alter the tax rate. Our legislature has chosen to. Was this a sign from the universe just to stop?
If folks could be sure to keep yourselves muted, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay. At multiple times in the last 40 years, our state legislature has responded to this information that the Department of Revenue provides by statute. And it's not a recommendation, it's not an order, it's just information. And they've responded by altering that residential tax rate in a bipartisan way. It is 100% their prerogative to do this. In 2023, our last appraisal year, that 1.35% was kept at 1.35%. The state did not alter it. Now, what I find interesting, and I'm not going to offer any assumptions here, is they didn't say why. They just kept it as is. Now, you could say, well, so what? Doesn't even matter. Well, I'll ask you guys, you're a captive audience. What happened to the residential real estate market between 2021 and 2023 in Missoula? It went up thank you for adding the significantly, because just saying up doesn't barely touch it. We're talking the biggest increase in any 2-year period that we know of. A fantastically large leap forward. In fact, I'm going to guess, Jane, that so in the spring of that year, you got a note, we all got a note from the Department of Revenue, a little love postcard that says, hey, guess what? This is what your new appraised value is of your house. And on that same postcard, it says, and if nothing else changes, this is what your taxes are going to be. And it was really, really scary. It was terrifying to people. Not because it was written in bad font or something. It was terrifying because the value of people's homes soared 30, 40, 50%. I think, where Allison, she was in the room, she led our, yours was like 60% or something? Yeah, just an incredible amount. And that very well may be true. I'm not saying that that isn't accurate. This is what changed in the market from 2021 to 2023. This is what happened. For all kinds of reasons we don't need to talk about here and now, everyone and their cousin decided they wanted to move to Western Montana. So people's homes went way, way up in value. So the taxable value, I kind of skirted past this, but I'll say it now, taxable value, if you remember right, is the assessed value of your house multiplied by the tax rate. So if the value of your house went up by 40, 50, 60%, and the tax rate maintained the same, what would that do to your taxable value? Go up significantly. Significant rise, massive rise, unprecedented, historic. These are words that were used to describe this at the time. So it is worth wondering why the state did not adjust the tax rate on residential property in such unprecedented historic times. But they didn't. I'm not going to speculate. You can dig it up and chat with folks. I'm sure you may have done that already even. There's people who I'm sure are willing to talk about it because it was a really big deal. In fact, it was such a big deal that at the end of last legislative session, there were calls for a special session just to consider this. And these were from people on both sides of the political spectrum. I really believe that this is not a partisan issue. It's bigger than that. If anything can be bigger than partisanship, I think property taxes are. So the taxable values of property in 2023 soared, went through the roof because property values went up so high, and the tax rate for residential property was not adjusted. So hold that taxable value piece in your head for a moment. Just hold on to it. We're going to come back. The other piece that we're here to talk about tonight, and Chris is about to do a fantastic job on, is our budget. So important to note that about 2/3 of our budget, 2/3 of the money we spend, does not come from property taxes. It comes from grants from the state, the federal government, philanthropy, or fee-for-service. It does not come from local property taxes. So if a person is very concerned with property taxes, and I imagine most everybody is, the thing to consider when evaluating Missoula County is how much we raise in taxes this year, generate, and how much did we ask for last year, and what's the difference, and what are we going to do with that money? Don't look at spending. If 2/3 of the spending come from non-local property tax sources, that's not a good proxy for taxation. In fact, there is no proxy for taxation. If you're concerned about taxation, look at taxation. In fact, were you at the Pete Buttigieg event? So the Secretary of Transportation recently came to visit us, was out at the airport, in part because of the great work Dave and his crew have done on rail, but really because, not really, additionally, because Missoula, and I'm saying Missoula County, the City of Missoula, and the Missoula Metropolitan Planning Organization, the MPO, these are the entities that deal with transportation, and now the Big Sky Passenger Rail Authority, together, I think, brought in more than $130 million in the last 3 years for infrastructure projects. We competed really well. The feds made a lot of money available. We competed well. Our congressional delegation worked on our behalf, and we won $130 million plus in grants for infrastructure, roads, bridges, rail, sewer, water, the airport, the Missoula Urban Transportation District as well. Now, all these entities, the city, the county, the MPO, the MUTD, Big Sky Passenger Rail, are going to spend this money fixing roads and bridges and other transportation projects. Now, if you just look at spending, you're like, oh my God, those crazy liberals in Missoula spending like drunken soldiers. They just never saw a project they didn't like. The money didn't come from local property taxes. If you're concerned about property taxes, and I'm guessing you two are, you wouldn't be here, look at local property taxes. Don't look at spending. Okay, that's the end of my rant on that. But the piece you really should look at is what are we asking for in property taxes? That's super important, super crucial, and we need to be able to own it, stand behind it, be proud of it, to down to the dollar. So in 2023, we increased the amount we brought in local property taxes by 5.4%. At the time we did that, inflation was about 6%. So we came in at less than the rate of inflation. And in fact, if taxable values, remember taxable values? I got to quiz you again.
I remember.
Okay. If taxable values had stayed the same, what if in a different universe, real estate hadn't gone crazy and everything was just the same as it was in 23, as it was in 21, just the same, and we had raised our taxes by less than the rate of inflation? Your buddy who owns a $600,000 house, she would have got a tax break. But in fact, those taxable values were so big, and our budget increase that comes from taxes was so small, that if our budget increase had actually been zero, you still would have paid more in taxes. I'm only telling you 2/3 of the story. There's another third to get. That should boggle your mind. Wait a minute. How come if you didn't raise the budget any, I'd still pay more in taxes? It doesn't make sense. Well, I'm about to put these two pieces together that make this work. The first piece is the taxable value. The value of your home soared. Griffin's buddy, she has the $600,000 house, her value soared. The legislature didn't adjust the tax rate, so the taxable value of her house was monstrous. We raised taxes by 5.5%, 5.4%. Well, when we raise taxes by 5.4%, we don't raise that 5.4% on Griffin's buddy, or me, or Dave, or Juan, or Jane, or anybody else. We're talking about a 5.4% increase on all the money we ask for from the entire county, all 16 different classifications, every single property, all added together. It makes, imagine a big pie, a pie chart, a big circle. That circle got 5.4% bigger. That's what we did. How much of that 5.4% increase belongs to your friend with the $600,000 house? That's not up to us. That's based on the taxable value of her property, and this is super important, the taxable value of every other piece of property in the county. It's a finite pie. It got bigger 5.4%. It can't be any bigger than that, which means if somebody gets an increase, if their taxable value increases, they're going to see a rise in their taxes if and only if somebody else sees a decrease in their taxable value. Imagine a piece of pie, a circle of pie. If one piece gets bigger, another piece has to get smaller. If all the pieces get bigger simultaneously, they just push against each other and there's tension. But in order for one to grow, something else has to get smaller. So your friend, if she was sitting here, would be like, wait a minute, I think you're full of crap. You guys say you raised taxes 5.4% and my taxes went up 25%. What's going on? Okay, this is a big quiz, Griffin. What do you think happened?
I didn't know this would be a quiz.
It's all right. You're a friendly guy and you're the only one here. So Jane's here too. But Jane probably knows the answer because she's been watching this stuff forever. It's a finite circle. In order for yours to get bigger, what has to happen?
I'm going to have to guess one of those 16 went down.
Correct.
And it would be central service.
Centrally assessed.
Centrally assessed.
Yes. In order for residential property taxes to go up, something else has got to go down. And we do not have anything to do with this. Zero. This is all about that equation to get to taxable value. The assessed value of the property, the method of the valuation to get to that value, and the tax rate. These are the rules of taxation. And the state sets the rules, we play by the rules. And please don't interpret this as finger pointing. I'm talking about responsibility. This is in statute, this is responsibility. The finger pointing would be if they did a bad job or a good job. I'm just saying this is their job. If you can hear that, that's different than finger pointing. I'll let somebody else say they did a bad job or a good job. Great question. Their taxable value, their rate remained the same, but their values dropped. When the assessed value of their property dropped so much that centrally assessed, their taxable values went down by $50 million from 2021 to 2023. $50 million reduction in taxable value. And their rate remains the same. So the rate, which is 6%, I believe. So in order for that taxable value to drop, the value of their property, the assessed value of their property, had to go down. And this definitely begs the question, how is it that, and I didn't even say what they were, but I think you know what they are. The centrally assessed are a set of industries, not a set of companies, but a set of industries. Chris can help me if I get it wrong. Pipelines, railroads, airlines, telecoms, and Northwestern Energy. So Griff could answer the question to your friend. I'm just going to make up a mythical thing. Your friend who has a $600,000 house, she also owns 4 acres. Northwestern Energy owns 4 acres right next to her. Her 4 acres went up in value by 40%. Northwestern's went down by 40%. How is that? In the same market, in the same moment, how is that? Well, it's because the valuation method is different. Northwestern Energy's land or their property, and actually with centrally assessed, it's really their business, is valued, assessed differently than residential property or property available for development, which is 100% of market rate. Centrally assessed is valued differently. And because of their valuation method, they saw a massive decrease in taxable value, which resulted for them in a decrease in tax liability and resulted for residential property taxpayers, because their taxable values went up, in an increase in property tax liability. So we raise taxes 5.4%, your taxes go up 25%. Why? Because you are covering the tax break for these other industries. You subsidize the tax break for Verizon, BNSF, and all the others I just mentioned. In an ideal world, a world that does not exist, but in an ideal world, we would raise taxes 5.4%, which at that moment was less than the rate of inflation. Basically, we gave the deputies a raise and kept the lights on. That's pretty much it. That your taxes would go up by 5.4%. That, in my eyes, I'm just speaking for myself as one person, that would be fair. And everybody else's taxes would go up by 5.4%, and Northwestern Energy's would go up by 5.4%, and we would just share this burden. In the world of taxation, this is what's happened. It's called the burden shift. So the burden has shifted onto residential taxpayers. Now, recently, in the relative recent past, what I'm talking about has really only been a problem in Missoula County and Gallatin County, where we saw the values, the taxable values of residential property soar because real estate in these places went way up. Now, just to be crass but true, Gallatin County and Missoula County are not politically relevant places in state politics. We don't really matter. There's a supermajority. We don't matter. I'm not saying we're not important and people there aren't smart or anything, but our votes don't really matter that much. But the problem I'm describing right now, and the problem being we raise taxes 5.5% and your taxes go up 25%, that problem is now across half the state. So all of a sudden, everybody is awake to it. Now it's a real problem. So I called this the burden shift. I didn't call that. It's called the burden shift. There was a time when the tax system that we live with right now actually made kind of sense. I don't believe that we have this system right now that doesn't make sense because anybody was evil or wanted to sell out their neighbors or anything bad. I think time just passed. So here's what I mean. If you go back to the early 90s, we had a major industrial base in Missoula County. 4 huge mills right near Missoula that paid roughly in the peri-urban area, paid about 60% of the property taxes. That industrial base is gone. And the residential base, well, back in the early 90s, homes in Missoula were not worth very much. They weren't worth very much compared to what they are now, and they weren't worth very much compared to homes nationally. Right now, in Missoula County, in the city of Missoula, homes are hundreds of thousands of dollars worth more than the national median home price. So way back in Jane, really, you looked at me quizzically there. I think the national median home price is like $380,000, and I think in Missoula it's like $560,000, something like that. Is that in the ballpark?
Somewhere around there.
Yeah. So early 90s, huge industrial base carried the load for residential property, carried the load for property taxes. Residential property taxpayers didn't pay a lot because their homes weren't that valuable. And this other entity, remember the 16 different classes? One of those other classes was paying so much of that pie. The resident piece of the pie for residential property wasn't very big. And lastly, in terms of big changes, in the early 90s, we didn't get very many tourists. And to be very wise of you, smart, whatever, astute to say, well, what does that even matter? You're wandering, dude. Get back, focus. Tourists, what are you talking about? I'm bringing up tourists because we provide services for millions. In 2022, I think it was 2.5 million tourists, according to the Institute for Tourism and Recreation Research from the U of M. Average length of stay, 6.5 days. We provide services to those folks, and they don't pay, not because they're jerks, but because they don't have an opportunity to. We make sure when those folks are here, if they need to call 911, there's somebody there to answer the phone, that the roads they drive on are well enough maintained, that pretty much everything works here. I'm sure we could say it doesn't work as well for everybody as we would like, but generally speaking, life in Missoula County is clean, predictable, efficient, and functional. And we made that happen with our tax dollars, and now we have to make that happen for a whole bunch of people who don't pay for any of it. Back in 1991, we didn't really get very many tourists. Again, please don't hear this as a maligning tourists. We're grateful for them. They contribute to our economy, and I'm glad they're here. It's not their fault they don't have an opportunity to pay. It's just the way the system works. I'm only bringing this all up because in 1991, the system that I'm saying is broken right now kind of worked. We didn't hear so much complaining about property taxes. Now, flash forward to right now. That industrial base is gone. The rules around valuation for centrally assessed have changed, so now their property values drop every year. Home values have soared, and the residential property tax rate stayed the same, and we had 2.5 million tourists. You put all that together, and you get a situation where we raise taxes 5.4%, and your taxes go up by 20%. So, in short, our tax system needs an upgrade. Just like your laptop's going to say, oh, time to upgrade. Occasionally, I'm sure you're on it as a professional, but this system needs an upgrade. And I'm optimistic, I think we will see some changes this legislative session. The governor pulled together a property tax task force. As you know, I applied, but I didn't make the cut. Can't get everything. I think this group is going to come up with some good ideas and some bad ideas, and the legislature will have to wrestle with them. And I think between this and Medicaid expansion, they're going to have their hands full on lots of other issues too. But I believe there will be some solutions that come out of this because it's a problem felt by so many. But we're here to talk about budget. I'm only bringing all this up because that question of the taxable value of your property and the class of property that your property is in plays a bigger role in your ultimate tax liability than our budget. And it is far more volatile. I mentioned our ability to tax being capped. I want to talk about this for just a moment. This is called the mill cap. Taxation is measured in mills. A mill is a unit of taxation the way a mile is a unit of measure. However, a mill as a unit of measure is also a little like a foreign currency. So I hope you've been to Europe recently. Never. Damn, dude. You're such a hardworking guy. Shane, have you been to Europe recently? Many times. So I'm just imagining you're going to dinner in some lovely location with your family, and you see, oh, it's 18 euros for this bottle of wine. One of the questions you might be asking yourself is, well, how many dollars is that? And you might have to check your phone because the exchange rate changes with some regularity. It's kind of volatile. So a mill is a unit of taxation, but the value of a mill changes. It's not the same every year. It's not like a mile's 5,280 feet. It changes. If you were to take all the taxable values of all the different property in the entire county of every type, add them all up and divide by 1,000, that equals 1 mill. So if real estate values go up, again, they soared, went up significantly, we're going to see mill value go up significantly. So our ability to levy mills, which means ask for money in taxes, is capped by the state. In dollars, what we get, what we have access to, is the same money we got last year, plus a little bump that's equivalent to half the 3-year average of inflation. Now that should give you pause. you get to go up by half the 3-year average of inflation.
And all new development.
Oh, you beat me to it. I'm not there yet. Dude's heard the talk before. So if all we had access to was a little bump that is half the 3-year average of inflation, we would be in a lot of trouble. At the county, we pay for people's time. We hire people, lots of people, to do all kinds of things, from elections to public safety, to taking care of the roads, et cetera. Those folks would not remain working for us if they only got an increase at half the level of inflation when their lives have to work on the entire rate of inflation. In fact, if that's all we had, we would be sunk. But as Griffin pointed out, we also have access to the taxes from newly constructed property that's newly online in terms of taxes. It's called, this in the world of taxation, it's called newly taxable. So we get a bump of half the 3-year average of inflation, and we get newly taxable property. We also, and this isn't we get, if democracy happens, if people decide they want something and want to pay for it via taxation, they can vote for it. And we saw this recently with the fire levy in the city. We're the county, but I'm just using this as an example. Residents of the city decided they wanted to voluntarily raise their taxes to put some money towards a new fire department and some new fire people. They did that. So anything voted on, so mill levies, bonds, or there's also even special districts, but I'm not going to go there because I want you guys to remain awake. Anything voted on is also outside of the mill cap. Going back to my example, we raised taxes 5.4%. Your buddy with the $600,000 house, her taxes went up 25%. We couldn't raise taxes 25% even if some awful people in our shoes wanted to do that. It could not happen. It's impossible by statute. The only way that could happen hypothetically is if we got that much growth, which you can't build houses that fast, or if citizens voted something in. In terms of our budget, it's impossible. There's that cap that we just slam up against. So as we talk about the budget, I want to say, yeah, it's really important. And I wish more than 2 people were here and could say, we don't think you should spend so much money on X. Y is a bigger problem. That would be wonderful to hear people's input. But I want to make sure for the other 2 or 3 people out there listening that they don't misunderstand this, that our budget is going to result in their tax liability. It's taxable value of your property and the taxable value of everybody else's property in every other classification that has a far bigger impact on your tax liability. And in fact, our ability to generate taxes is capped. Now, I started this rant off saying we're not in a reappraisal year. So that means the taxable value should stay the same, right? Almost. Those centrally assessed industries, they are all appealing their taxable value. They're all appealing their assessed values. Every one of those, almost, I don't know of the companies, but companies in all of those industries, the major ones for sure, are all appealing the valuations of their property. And interestingly enough, this is just by custom, not by statute. When those appeals happen, they have to happen formally by June 20th, these industries get to send representatives, attorneys, to go negotiate with the Director of Department of Revenue behind closed doors in Helena. And they get to negotiate and decide what the value of their property is. This is not a privilege afforded to any of us at this table. I don't know why this is the case. It's just custom. There's only one Director of Department of Revenue that I know of, Dan Bucks, who didn't do this, who insisted that these negotiations happen in public. But they happen behind closed doors. So it should be in a non-reappraisal year that if we raise taxes by 4.5%, your taxes go up by 4.5%. But that's not going to be what it is. Because those industries I mentioned, they will be successful in their negotiation. Their values, the values of their property will go down, which means the taxable value of their property will go down, which means their tax liability will go down, and it means yours will go up. Necessarily, because it's a finite pie. So it's almost an off year for getting kicked in the stomach, but not quite.
Today's June 20th.
Today's June 20th. Okay, I think I should end there and let Chris talk about budget. I'm happy to answer any questions. And thanks for your patience and for your interest. It would be a great world if more than 2 people were interested.
It's recorded.
So we could get 100% increase? We could get 4 people?
Yeah. I'm gonna follow Josh. I'm not as good.
Well,
I'm not as good a presenter as Josh is.
You're going to actually fill in with
So-
details, which I didn't know.
Well, I'll fill in with a few details because we're just getting ready to kick off our budget process. It starts now. And so I wanted to give folks just a quick overview of what that budget process will look like and the things that the commissioners and staff take into consideration as they do that. So I wanted to start off with a little bit about how we approach the budget. And so when we look at fiscal year 24, which is the fiscal year that'll end in just 10 days now, we knew going into that budget season that we had some really big challenges in front of us. And a lot of those challenges, as Josh pointed out, really focused around inflation and what it was doing to our ability to recruit and retain what I would describe as critical positions around the county. And so we were looking at a place we had never been at before. We were down 19 detention officers at that point, 8 deputy sheriffs, 6 911 dispatchers, and 4 county attorneys. So just on the public safety side of our world, we were unsuccessful in our ability to recruit and retain critical positions to be able to provide one of the key services that local government provides, which is public safety. And so we knew we were going to have to focus really hard on how we recruited and retained staff as part of our fiscal year 24 budget. We also were looking at the fact that, as Josh pointed out, we have to buy a lot of our services in the regular market. And so when the cost of asphalt jumps $15,000 a ton, we have to absorb that cost in order to continue to be able to pave roads. So those were the areas that we really focused our spending on and our increases this last year when Josh talks about the rate that it went up. And the other piece that we looked at, of course, was trying to stay under the rate of inflation, which is always one of our goals. So now as we shift gears and look at fiscal year 25, where are we in terms of the goals that we set out for fiscal year 24? So the good news is some of those investments that the county commissioners made and that the public made in their tax dollars were really successful. We've been able to fill those deputy sheriff's positions. We are fully staffed and almost fully trained. So deputy sheriffs have about a 12-week training program once they get through the 12-week academy. So it's about 24 weeks before a deputy is able to work on their own. It's about the same timeline for detention officers and for 911 folks. And so, but we're really close. We are down just 1 dispatcher now compared to the 6 that we were. So we still have an opening. Our county attorney's office is almost fully staffed. They have 1 open position, and our deputies are fully staffed. So we made some really good progress in fiscal year 24 in addressing a really key issue for us. And now we are looking around the rest of the county and, looking at those same things. And we always start our budget process by looking at what are the values of the counties? What are the things that are most important to the county as a whole and the citizens that we serve? And those are listed up there as kind of the things that we've noted from strategic planning as kind of the key areas that we need to continue to engage in. So health and safe, vibrant communities that we all want to live in, and that includes not just, the areas of the incorporated city, but all of the communities around Missoula County, from Frenchtown to Condon, Sealy Lake, East Missoula, Clinton, all of the areas around Missoula County. We want to be good resource stewards. We have a lot of investment from the public in the form of voted levies around things like open space. The community has identified that as a value. We want to be good steward of those voter-approved tax dollars, not just the ones that we have control over when we talk about our budgeting process. And then we set a goal again this year to stay under the rate of inflation, which thankfully has come down significantly. So we are aiming for that as well. So I just want to remind folks that as a local government, Missoula County is a little bit different than, say, the city of Missoula. So county governments are really an arm of state government. That is our job, is to carry out state functions at the local level. And so there are big chunks of our budget that, even though they look like they might be things that are controllable in our budget, they really are outside of our direct control because they are statutorily required services that we have to provide. So for example, we are required to have a 911 center. That was one of our key focuses last year. We had 6 vacancies. That's a service by law we must provide. And of course, everyone wants us to provide. No suggestion there that they wouldn't. We're required to do things like have a health department to make sure that we have safe drinking water, and we take care of storm water, and we take care of sewage. We're required to administer elections. We just had a successful primary election, and we're headed into the November general election season here in the not too distant future. Because we employ a lot of folks, the state says we have to have human resources and we have to operate inside certain guidelines when we employ folks. And another big one, just as an example here, is district court. And so we have 5 district court judges assigned by the state, but we're required to provide the staff to be able to man those courtrooms, to be able to summon jurors and have jurors show up for jury trials. So when you look at just some of our statutory departments there, you will look at, they are the biggest chunk of our property tax dollars. They are about $30.2 million of the services that we provide are in those large departments that are largely state mandated. But there are things that we have control over and that are more discretionary. So things like the fairgrounds, for example, we've chosen as a community to make investments in that area. The fair itself is free, and the fair event, we work really hard to make cost neutral by making sure that we have events that attract folks who spend money, and then that money is used to pay for those events, things like the carnival or the 4-H show or the rodeo or some of the amazing music acts that happen there. But there is still a small cost to taxpayers in order to have that fair and to have the fairgrounds maintained, and we've been working really hard to make those investments there. We also have things like wildfire mitigation. It's a small program with 2 staff primarily who work in that, but this year they were successful in bringing in $5 million in grants. So for that $200,000 investment, we're returning that many-fold over and being able to bring in $5 million of grants that will help to do fuel treatments and work in the, Dave, help me out, the home ignition zone. Thank you, Dave. I was going to say, HIZ, I live in the world of acronyms, and then I forget what the acronyms are. That's never a good sign. And so that part of our budget that really is discretionary when we look at those areas right there is about $4.6 million. And $4.6 million is a large number. Certainly, it's not as large as the services that we're statutorily required to provide, and this is not an exhaustive list. This is just examples. But just with the examples that we have there, those discretionary services, many of which are matched and bring in larger federal awards for us, on average for a $500,000 home in Missoula County, costs the average homeowner somewhere between $60 and $70 a year for that. And by comparison, for that $60 or $70 in property tax investment, as I pointed out, we brought in about $5 million in just one of those programs and grants. So this is really when Josh talks about the idea that we bring in about 1/3 of our income from property taxes and the other 2/3, about 1/3 each, from grants and fees for service. This is how we are able to obtain those grants, is in that more discretionary space that we work. So when we start off the budget process, and this is the piece that we're at right now and why we're here tonight, we start with the base budget. And this is what did we do last year and how much will it cost us just to do those exact same things the next year without changing anything about the way we do, without altering the level of service that we provide. What do we project it will cost in additional staff salaries to be able to give raises? What will it cost for medical costs for us, equipment that we need to buy in the open market? How will we provide that same level of service? And that's where we start. And so we make some assumptions about that, right? We make an assumption about what we think the rate of inflation will be. We make an assumption as we negotiate with all of our collective bargaining partners. About 80%, a little more than 80% of our staff is covered by collective bargaining agreements. What will those costs be? And that's where we start off our budget process. We don't assume that we will get any new revenue because we don't know what will happen with centrally assessed properties. We don't know exactly what changes will happen related to newly taxable value. And so we try to start off with using just the same money we had this year. What will the budget look like? And what would we have for a deficit or a surplus? And what money can we shift around? And so that's where we start. And that's the process that we are just in the process of started kicking off here recently. And then we look at, thanks, Allison, if you could jump back one. Then we look at where are the areas where we're still seeing increased demands, where we're still hearing from citizens or we're still hearing from departments that they're unable to meet the mission as they would like to. And so I gave some examples tying back to what we looked at in fiscal year 24. So our county attorney's office, again, gratefully is only one person short, but they've seen an additional 25 felony cases this year, an additional 50 civil commitments. And those civil commitments are folks who are experiencing mental health crises, who the county is responsible for working with the courts to make sure that they get the treatment that they need so that they can re-enter society. And those are can include folks who might be elders, who might be in abusive situations, might be folks who are having a mental health crisis, that piece. But already we're seeing 50 additional civil commitment cases. And so that's an area where the county attorney's office has said, probably not this year. We know budgets are tight. We can't look for services, but you should know we're seeing this trend in our department. Sheriff's Department, the same thing. They are seeing, again, the cases increasing. About 100 new cases were opened by the Sheriff's Department for crimes ranging from misdemeanors through felonies over this last year. And again, they're not saying we need to add staff this year, but what they're saying is, hey, Missoula County, this continues to be a trend as we grow as a community. We're seeing pressure in that area. The one that surprised me the most when we talked to those agencies that we had focused on the year before was the 911 center, an almost 10,000 call increase in the number of 911 phone calls placed by our community to 911. And from last year to this year. And so I reached out to our 911 center director. For folks who don't know, I started my career at Missoula County 26 years ago in 911. So this particular function is near and dear to my heart, having been one of those folks who at one point was on the other side of the 911 call and said, hey, what's going on with this where we're seeing such a significant increase in calls? And they said, well, it's twofold. Part of it is this thing you're seeing with the Sheriff's Department and the County Attorney's Office. More people equals more folks calling 911. The other thing they said is, believe it or not, even though cell phones aren't a new technology anymore, we just continue to see the number of people who call about one incident skyrocket. So they drive by an accident on Reserve Street, and it used to be you'd get one phone call because nobody had a cell phone, and so somebody would run to the payphone across the street and they'd call 911 and we would get one phone call. And then cell phones came along and it went, instead of one phone call, you got 10. Now, an accident on Reserve Street, they said on average can generate 50 or 60 phone calls to the 911 center. So while that number seems alarming, 10,000, it's why we do our investigation and we do our follow-up with those folks and we say, hey, that's a really big blip. So we know that, yes, they're seeing increased call volume. That's a reality of life. They still have to answer those calls. We have an obligation to answer those 911 calls when they ring, but it's not as alarming as one might think when they first see it and they think, gosh, that's an awful lot of 911 calls to see a jump in 1 year. The other piece that we know is that we have some bridges that we're really focused on this year. Folks may recall McClay Bridge. We have a short-term solution there that luckily allowed it to open this last week, which is fantastic for folks who live out in that area. I drive across that bridge fairly often, and so that's great. But we're also looking at a few bridges that need to be replaced that hopefully will be successful. We've applied for a grant, which we internally are calling the 5-Bridge Grant, that will help to replace some bridges in the Condon area through the federal RAISE grant program. But that still comes with a need for us to provide match to that grant. We are partnering with the state to help meet those match requirements for there, but we'll have a cost that will be something that if we're successful in that grant. But it will allow us to replace 5 bridges that are currently either closed or weight limited in our rural community, and that's really important. So those are things that we're kind of looking at when we talk about increased demands for services this next year. So this slide just shows, and I'm sorry, it's hard, probably a little easier to see online than it is in this room, because at least for me looking at this screen, there's a great glare right in the middle of the slide that doesn't make that too easy to see. But what that slide shows is fiscal year 24 on the left-hand side for me sitting here at the table, and that shows the fiscal year 24 budget, and it shows that I believe expenses are in yellow and revenues are in blue. And so what it shows is that we had a pretty balanced budget in fiscal year 24. We took in some additional revenue beyond our expenses, which is what we anticipated because we plan for capital improvement projects, and so we're always setting money aside because we know bridges will have to be replaced, police cruisers will have to be replaced, we'll have to buy graders eventually for the road department. So we plan for those big expenses over time so that we don't have to bear that cost all in one budget year. And you can see by the time we got to an adopted budget, we were pretty close to balanced. We took in a little more revenue, again, towards those capital projects than we were planning to expend. And what you can see right now is as we look at fiscal year 25, again, we've assumed no new revenue, but we will have some increased expenses around staff because we'll have to provide some raises. We know that the cost of healthcare is going up. So when we purchase that for our employees, we know there'll be some additional costs. And right now, that shows just about a $3 million difference between the revenues that we project that we will get, again, assuming no new tax revenues will come in, And what we anticipate those costs will be to provide just the same level of service that we did the last year. And that's across the roughly 1,200 employees Missoula County has, some of which are in our federally qualified health center and are not reflected in this budget because they are under a completely different system for that. Absolutely. So in FY25, what you're seeing is a reflection of some of those grants that we were talking about. So you do see things where we knew that there was guaranteed grant revenue coming into that, and that is why you see a little bit of a difference. The other piece that is in that revenue side is we're accounting for the rest of the American Rescue Plan dollars that were available to Missoula County coming out of that, and so you see those reflected. And again, this is reflecting the total revenue, not just the tax revenue. So it reflects the fees for service, grants, as well as that in this.
Is there a graph that shows that broken out a little clearer so that?
Yeah, so there will be when we get to the preliminary budget presentation, which I think is actually the next slide. So we're going to talk about what the next steps are, maybe. I think, nope, haven't, we're not there. We're two slides away. But yeah, but yeah. Yes, yep, we do. We actually budget out ARPA and our other federal awards, things like the National Opioid Trust Settlement and those kinds of things will actually show their own budget so that they can be separated out for folks, so they can see that one-time funding, even though ARPA was across multiple years. We think of it as one-time funding because it doesn't go on forever. The same thing for the opioid trust, even though the opioid settlements pay out over 18 years, we can't budget 18 years, so we budget just 1 year at a time based off that, even though we know the money will still be there the next year. We don't treat it like it will go on. You bet. So here's the things that we're looking at as we try to figure out how do we close that $3 million gap so that we can present a preliminary budget to the community that reflects not only our values, but also the areas where we think we may have to ask the commissioners to increase property taxes, as well as look at where we can do that. So the way that we're approaching that, the first thing we're doing is making sure that where we have a one-time cost, we've identified that clearly as a one-time expense, so it is not something that gets reflected as a need for property tax dollars to support it. And so you can think of that as things like when we talked about those 5 bridges, the match for those bridges isn't something that will go on forever. We only need to have money for that to meet that match one time. And so we don't necessarily want to look to property taxes and to increasing property taxes to cover that because it won't go on in duration. So that's, for example, one of the places that we go through. So we're matching each one of those grant programs or dollars that are coming in for a one-time expense and making sure they're not reflected somehow in a request for property taxes. We're also looking at where can we make reductions in operational expenses. And so, we talk about things like delaying purchases or looking at ways we can negotiate our contracts with all of our vendors. And so there are some service providers that there's really no negotiating room. So for example, Missoula County as a local government uses Microsoft Office. We buy that from Microsoft. Microsoft doesn't negotiate with us, lo and behold. And that's okay. We still get a pretty good deal because we get a government rate, and that's wonderful. But there are places where we do. We purchase gravel. We purchase things like paving materials. We purchase graders. We purchase those kinds of things. So where can we negotiate or look for the best opportunity to lower our costs so that we are asking, again, very prudently for any increases that we have to. We go back through each department budget and we go line by line with the departments and say, okay, we noticed this year you budgeted $600 for mailings, but you only spent $400 for mailings, but you're asking for $600 again. Why are you still asking for $600 if your average cost of mailing is only $400? And we look to how do we, can we take those things off? And so we're continuing to do that work as well. One of the things that the commission could consider is, maybe some positions don't get filled for a year just in order to be able to address the needs of the community and look at how do we balance the needs for services versus the cost of providing those services. Of course, we're always looking for grant or other funding sources. In the last couple of weeks, we have been notified of some additional grants that we've received, which will allow us to reduce the gap that you're seeing reflected on here when we talk about things like our wildland fire program, but also in some of our victim services and other things, which is great news because it does that. And then the last thing that we look at is making requests to the commissioners as part of the budget process for new property tax dollars related to that. So where we are in the process here, is what comes next. And so commissioners will start hearing in each of their administrative meetings, at the end of our administrative meetings, from departments who have requests for new things. So if they are asking for new ongoing revenue to cover something, be it a new piece of software or a new position or something like that, we'll begin hearing those things. And those meetings are Tuesdays and Thursdays at 10 o'clock. They are recorded, so the public can go back and watch them at their convenience. We know that's not the best time, but trying to schedule all of our departments, the easiest way to do that and make sure that we can get it recorded and out to the public is to do those as part of our administrative meetings. And so those will start in the beginning of July, right after the 4th on the first Tuesday, the date escapes my mind of the Tuesday after the 4th of July, but that's when those will start. And then we'll present all of this as a total package here to the community right around August 1st. We're scheduled right now for the Commissioners' public meeting on Thursday, August 1st, which will be here in the Sophie Moise room, to open up the preliminary budget. And we'll keep that open for about 30 days for the public to make comment. We'll have all the documents related to our budget posted online, and folks will have the opportunity also to provide comment both in person. They can do it in writing through the Missoula County Voice website. The link is up there, or by coming to any commissioners meeting between August 1st and the September 5th and providing public comment during that time. And so our hope is this year that we'll be able to get even more information out in front of the public than we have in years past to really give folks a chance to provide meaningful input, because the number of required services always is greater than the discretionary services, but we know how tight budgets are, not just for us, but for families at home. As Josh pointed out, there was a massive shift in taxes that happened this last year, and we recognize the impact of that. And so with that, we'll turn off the PowerPoint, because I know we have a couple folks here in the room and we have some folks online, and that way we have an opportunity for folks to do questions. So Dave, I'm going to turn the mic back over to you as the chair to whether you want to go to in-room comments first before online.
Why don't we reverse the order, since there's been a lot of discussion in the room? Is there anyone online participating today who would like to offer a comment or ask a question? And you can use the raise hand function if you would like, and we will call on you in the order in which you raise your hand. Okay, let's come back here to the room. Jane or Griffin?
Yeah, why not?
Why not?
Just on that base budget, you talk about your expenses, and I'm wondering that 170 and 180, is that for the whole entire budget? Is that just for property taxes? Yeah.
So that is reflective of property taxes, fees, and grants as the sources. So that is all of that, with the exception of Partnership Health Center, which is its own fund structure, again, because they are covered by Medicaid and a special federal grant. And so while we do account for them in the total budget that will be presented during the preliminary budget, we will separate that out so folks can see the piece that's Partnership Health Center and then look at this number, which is, again, the things that are really more under the commissioner's control, because Partnership's budget is really under a separate board, the Partnership Health Board, and so we don't control that. But there are no property tax dollars that go to Partnership Health Center for them to provide that service. It is just solely federal funding that comes through, either through Medicaid or through their grant.
Great question.
Yeah, it is a great question, because they are different.
So base budget, not including maybe some new expenses or a change in the Department of Revenue, is from 170 to 180 million.
So I just want to make sure I understand the question. So we know the revenue number will change once we get the information from the Department of Revenue, because they'll be newly taxable in those things, but we try really hard not to make guesses on what that will be. And so right now, it's based off just the revenue from last year, or grants that we know have been awarded. So if we already received a grant award letter, it's in that revenue picture. If we haven't yet, then it may be held off to the side. So, yeah. Did you have another one, or?
That's it.
Okay. Jane, did you have any? Sorry.
Well, my question's a little bit off topic. I think of the budget as the start of the year plan, and then at the end of the year is when local government entities are required to prepare their financial reports, okay? And the question that I have, and which are audited, my question is, I can't find anywhere an FY '22 financial report that has been audited, and I can't find an FY '23 financial report that's been audited. And now, in a couple of weeks, we're going to be at the end of FY '24. So can you give me a status report?
That is a great question. So I'm happy to explain that. So and that is a really great question. So unfortunately, the way the audit process works for local governments is it's a three-way partnership between the state of Montana, the local government, and the outside auditor. Correct. The Department of Administration, yep, is who represents the state of Montana. And so unfortunately, Missoula County, not the only local government, there was an auditing firm that was providing local government audits who left the state and left several counties kind of hanging. So actually, just last week, we got our closeout for our fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 23 audit. We are very, very grateful. They are turning around and printing those books, and I was assured by the auditor before I let them leave our administrative building at 199 West Pine that we would have a copy that we could put up on the website prior to June 30th for those 2 fiscal years that are behind in the comprehensive financial audit. They are done. Hallelujah. And that we have a kickoff date for the fiscal year 24 audit with this new firm, which has been incredibly responsive. They've done those 2 audits that were behind. They basically scrapped the work that had been done by the previous auditing firm, and in the last 6 months have turned around 2 fiscal years worth of audits to get us compliant. That that kickoff is in mid-October, and they have assured us that they will have the comprehensive financial audit done by the December 31st timeline in which it is supposed to be completed. So we are very hopeful that this year we will have it posted prior to the start of the new calendar year in compliance with what I think both the state and everyone would like us to have had for the last 2 years. Yeah, you bet. It's a great question, and believe you me, that's I think the expression. We are all very grateful for the auditing firm out of Pennsylvania who is picking up not just Missoula County but several other counties that are behind because of this issue that happened. Yeah, it's been a real challenge. Yeah. Did you have other?
No, you
Okay.
made me happy.
I'm glad.
That was our goal.
I'm the token taxpayer. Although I know you all are too.
So one important. Oh, okay. Go ahead and read it if you could.
While the residential increase was a shock, I really appreciate the first gentleman's careful and detailed explanation of reasons why.
I'll just hop in here. This is Don Lasilla, a resident up at Condon, Montana. Just wanted to really thank the first gentleman's careful and detailed explanation for the reasons of the increases and how it happened and the concerns that seem to be across the state. You folks are demonstrating prudent care and general concern for the appropriate strategic mission to support the citizens of Missoula County, and I also appreciate that. Lastly, I'm just astonished that there's only 6 of us here attending. Certainly, I was not that elite that I was one of the few to have received an invite to participate in something as important as the transparency that you're sharing here. Just like to thank you all. I do have to get to another meeting already, and I will be attending more of these, provided I continue to receive invitations.
Thank you.
Wait, how'd you find out?
How did you find out about this meeting?
I believe this came in, I receive a general Missoula County
Weekly.
summary email that
Excellent.
comes out once a month or something like that.
Okay.
And Don, that was Commissioner Josh Slotnick who spoke first, so.
Yes, that was Commissioner Josh Slotnick. Thanks so much for joining us from the Swan.
Thank you very much.
So for those who are still left, one additional little tidbit of information, and this is probably something folks know already, but some in the community do not. Missoula County is basically the tax collector for various taxing jurisdictions. So what Josh so eloquently described by way of property taxes relative to Missoula County government, and what Chris so thoroughly described by way of our upcoming FY25 budget relate to the county portion of your tax bill. There are other taxing jurisdictions, such as schools, such as fire districts, such as other special districts, depending on where you live in Missoula County. Those are outside of county government and the piece of the pie that we have jurisdiction over. So just a point of clarification, when you get your tax bill, for me, I live in the city of Missoula, and a big chunk of my tax bill is the city of Missoula, not Missoula County government, which is what I work for here.
Property tax information system? I'll say it. Yeah. So I don't want to just piggyback off of what Commissioner Strohmeyer just said. If someone is interested in how much of their taxes goes to the county, to the city, if you live in the city, to the school district, everybody's in a school district, or fire districts or other special districts, you can go to Missoula County Property Tax Information System and then type in either your name or your address, click on taxes, and then click on pie charts. And the first thing you'll see is a pie chart of all the taxes you pay and where those taxes go. City, county, fire districts, school districts, et cetera. And then you can drill down even farther and click on the county and see even more pie charts about where all your money goes that you send to the county. And ask yourself if it was worth it. So we do a good job with pie charts.
And if you have an inquiring mind or a voyeur at heart, you can also look at what your neighbor's property taxes might be. Or I live at 508 East Pine Street here in Missoula. You can look at my taxes also. So it's all out there for public inspection. All right. Thanks everyone for joining us. Stay in touch.